Otherwise, you're just writing to Natalie and I, and we want everyone to hear what you have to say. And say hello in there. This is going to be an interactive session, so even though we can't see your faces, we want to hear from you in the chat. Fantastic. So keep those hellos going, and I'm going to get started. My name is Danielle. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the founders and organizers of Austin Design Week. And I'm so thrilled to have you here today for this session. It has been an amazing week at Austin Design Week. It's hard to believe we're on our final day, but we still have lots of great programs coming up, including this one and several more for the rest of the day, ending with a closing concert by Mobley that you won't want to miss. You can head on over to our website at austindesignweek.org and check out the schedule. All events are free, so please make sure that you check that out. I also encourage you to follow along on social. You'll see our social handles here at the bottom, hashtag ADW20, hashtag embrace. You can fill in that blank. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to join our Slack community. We have lots of great conversations happening there. You can introduce yourself. You can hear what's happening at other events. Folks have been really great at writing recaps. I encourage you after this event to share what you've learned and continue the conversation, and also get in some important updates. Natalie, next slide. And then finally, I want to say a big, big thank you. There are so many people that come together to make this event possible for the community and to help us keep it free. So we have volunteers that are helping all year round, and then also the week of, you'll see them in the chat. We also have our generous hosts who are putting together this material and these conversations for you. We have community partners, and then importantly as well, our sponsors who are, again, helping us make this possible for the community, and we want to give them a big shout out. So before I move forward, the last thing I want to say is if you just joined, please open up the chat, switch your to panelists and attendees, and say hello. And I'm really thrilled to hand it over to Natalie, who's going to be leading our session today. Natalie, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to say a warm welcome to all designers, whether you're formally in a position of one or you're a designer of life, your life for others. Yeah, welcome. I'm Natalie, and a little about me is that I was born in a different country, so I got to experience disability with a lens through different societies, essentially, or to different cultures. And my pronouns are she and her, or they, so it's all good. And after that experience of being able to compare America and a different country, I was lucky enough to also go to college and learn a lot about different topics like race and gender, but I never really got to learn about disability, especially in depth, even though it was such a profound impact on my life. In the pictures, I am shown in my scooter and outside of my scooter. And one of them is me in California, another is me in Norway, and another is in a gay club in Austin, which is really fun. And another one, I'm getting ready for a company party with my partner and my kitty named Cannoli. So that was really fun. But as you can tell, I like to travel, and I really like fashion and going out and living a life. And I do all of this with a disability. Yeah. A lot of that experience of having a disability, I've had to learn on my own and going out of my way to read and absorb and consume as much information as I could. And so yeah, there's a little bit about me. In true sociology fashion, I forgot to mention, I studied sociology, so I did a lot of research, quantitative and qualitative. I did a quick survey of fellow disabled people online, and I got a great bunch of knowledge from everyone. And one of them is that, okay, so the question was, what do you wish that non-disabled people knew about you and your identity as having a disability? So the a couple of the answers said how exhausting it can be to always feel like you have to prove that you're their equal. And another person says, being disabled is not a bad thing. I don't hate my life because I am disabled. I love my life the way it is. And I know to a lot of people who are disabled, this is not new, but for a lot of people who don't experience disability, this has to be said, and it's very interesting to say the least. And a little more of the responses include, I deserve the same opportunities and access as everyone else, and I'm just another human being, not to be pitied or praised for living life as everyone else, of course. And another person says, I'm not a sob story or inspiration porn. We'll learn a little bit more about inspiration porn shortly. So first, I would like everyone to know that disability is part of nature. And we have existed through time and space throughout history, and we will always exist. So a quick rundown of some famous disabled people we already may know include Harriet Tubman, who is a famous American abolitionist who developed a traumatic brain injury and continued to do a lot of great work throughout her life, even with TBI. And another is Franklin Roosevelt. He had polio that he developed, interestingly, on the campaign trail. And a couple of others are Stevie Wonder, and he is a blind musician. Shane Burka is a famous author who recently got married while under quarantine, so congrats to them. And Niall DeMarco is a famous model and activist who won America's Next Top Model and Dancing with the Stars. So very impressive of him. I wanted to ask a quick question of everyone. If you would take a few seconds to say whether or not you have a disability, to share, do you know a disabled colleague or neighbor at this time? We'll take a few seconds. All right, so I want to remind, if you identify as having a disability, it would be great to speak about other people who you may or may not know who are colleagues or neighbors. All right, I'm getting some great responses. It looks like everyone knows someone who's disabled at this time, so congrats to y'all. That's awesome news. A lot of times people will not have the experience of being able to know someone who is disabled or neurodivergent or deaf or any kind of condition. So fantastic. Thank you for your time, everyone. All right, let's move on up. So as a young college student, I got to experience a little bit about how disability advocacy can look very different for everyone. And Stella Young, who is pictured here, is a light-skinned woman using a wheelchair. She is one of the biggest reasons that I do what I do, and am so patient sometimes. Just kidding. But she was a comedian and a writer and a huge advocate for people with disabilities in Australia, especially. And she created a TED Talk called I Am Not Your Inspiration. Thank you very much. That was the ending. So through that TED Talk, she illuminated the fact that Through media, disabled people are often depicted as someone who is there for the consumption of non-disabled people. That usually means that disabled people do not exist outside of our needs or a need to serve someone else. And that usually means people who do not have disabilities. And in one of her many writings, which I recommend diving into someday if you have time, she shares the sentiment, "The world is not yet right for us." And this is a huge theme of this talk because it's so optimistic and at the same time shares that it's a lot of the world and not us as individuals with disabilities who have to do the work by ourselves or among us. Perfect. So this is a lovely meme that kind of encapsulates inspiration porn, whimsically named, but in the image, there is a eager-looking man looking at a sandwich, and the man says, "Able-bodied people in desperate need of motivation." And the sandwich says, "Disabled people." So I thought this kind of put it in a comedic way. So yeah, it's a powerful meme indeed. In my academic days, I came across this quote that encapsulates also the idea that disabled people often face barriers in not just within our bodies, but within the world around us. So one concept is called the Thomas theorem, and it states, "Things perceived as real become real in their consequences," meaning that how we perceive a group of people often leads to how we act around that group of people, and there are dire consequences that can result for those people, usually not necessarily for the person who's perceiving. So with that in mind, I want to also say, similarly, there's the Pygmalion effect, which states that our beliefs turn and influence our actions that can impact what others believe about themselves and can cause other people's actions to reinforce what our beliefs were in the first place. So the Pygmalion effect has been around for over 100 years, but it's another way of saying like what our beliefs can manifest into reality a lot of times, and not for the better a lot of times. So Pygmalion effect is exemplified when teachers tend to show more positive body language towards students who they expect to be gifted. And in turn, those students perform better, and that can be as a direct result of being treated better, and so on and so forth. So this example can go so many different ways. This concept is so varied, but basically our expectations can lead to real realities and become self-fulfilling prophecies. Here is a picture of me, and I'm at the London airport in one of the train carts. And I'm pictured all by myself on one side, while a whole other cart right next to us is full of people who are so packed that they're standing amongst themselves. And I want to point out that this is a fantastic depiction of what it means oftentimes to have accessible design that does not consider integration or the social impacts for the disabled people. And I've been in this position many times. I want to point out that the people are probably not feeling too great towards me because I have all this room around me, and depicted in this photo anyway. And I also am not feeling so great because I don't want to be all by myself and isolated. Like, I consider myself a pretty social, outgoing person. So in the end, I'm kind of missing out on their company and they're missing out on mine. um, yeah. So accessible design, which is often stuck on as an afterthought, I want to point out, does not necessarily mean integration for disabled people into the society at large. All right, this is another favorite topic of mine. I like to share this wherever I go and whoever I get to talk to. So here we have the social model. Most of us are probably pretty aware of the medical model and the moral or ethical model. Both medical and moral model state or operate on the idea that disabled people need to be fixed or prevented from ever happening in the first place. So to me, that seems pretty silly because, you know, we're a pretty great addition to the world. And the social model, alternatively, sheds light on the fact that much of what disabled people face are physical and social barriers, not necessarily coming from our bodies. So, likewise, it also shares that disability does not always exist in a stagnant state across all context or settings, and instead, it can depend on the context. So, for example, if someone is blind and a group of people who are not blind go into a cave where it's completely black, people who are blind will already have a lot of the skills that are necessary to navigate the cave, but people who are not blind would perhaps have a difficult time or more difficult. So in that way, the social model shows that basically people who are disabled are not necessarily disabled in all settings. And disability is already a social construct. Here is a lovely cartoon that shows a wheelchair user pointing at a ramp and sharing their thoughts, saying, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" to the person who is shoveling a staircase instead. And the person who is shoveling says, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." But the wheelchair user says, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. Ain't that true? Enter the concept of universal design. This is a concept that a lot of people don't get to learn in design or other spheres, but there is a ton of great ideas out there, and it is a never-ending process about how to integrate more disabled people in different spaces and models of like online existing. So I want to also ask people to think about this for a moment, which is portrayed in this cartoon. What do you think that does to people when disability and disabled people are often thought of as an afterthought and not a part of the group? So I'll let you think about that for a second. So as you can guess, oh yeah, great responses. Thank you everyone so far. So I'm hearing a lot of the similar ideas, which is being treated as an afterthought has profound impacts on our emotional and social health. So I want to also point out that design has a lot to do with this as well. Design, not necessarily the diagnosis, often creates the quality of life that disabled people lead. And so I want to say that a lot of people who are disabled face poverty and prejudice for having a disability, but also in addition to having experiencing racism and sexism as well. So at the core of it, a lot of people want integration, and that can happen so many different ways, like so many. And I want to also provoke you all to think about what are some ways that could look in your lives. But in addition, I want to say design and the lives that we lead as disabled people can otherize us so deeply that maybe this is correlation or causation, but we do have really high incarceration rates and isolation and shortened lifespans. So these are all very real realities of disabled people. And all of us have such a big role in those, like individually and as groups. So let's hear a bit from you, either in the chat or in the question and answer section. Feel free to answer these 3 questions, which is first, how did you view disability growing up? This can be like a very vague idea or a very specific scenario if you want to share. Second, what do you want to learn more about disability? And is there anything in this talk that you heard that you want to hear more about? And how can you do that? Like, how are ways that you can keep learning? Because it's such an endless topic. I find myself constantly learning new things, of course, because being disabled is being human, and humans are endlessly fascinating, and there's so much to learn, of course. And number 3, what are ways you can keep improving access for people in your life or work or a neighborhood or in the communities that you are a part of? And this can be pretty small or huge, depending on how we set our sights. I'll give you about 3 to 5 minutes to come up with some questions and answers to this. right, about 1 more minute. All right. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to send in your last inquiries and thoughts. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. This is incredible. So much ideas and fresh ways of thinking. So great. Thank you. I'm hearing a lot of inquiries about some specific things that you want to learn about in your communities. So I highly encourage you to look up disability services in your town or area. So I'm sure that they also would appreciate your involvement and offering to help if you're in a position. Yeah, okay, well, great. I could get lost in your responses. So great. Okay, so here is a slew of great resources that I found in the last few months. So they're very new and trendy, and we have two animations here. One is a person sitting cross-legged with their hands flapping, and this is known as stimming for people on the autism spectrum, and it's very comforting. And the other is a flowing haired person in a manual chair moving forward, and it says, "Let it flow." First off, most of us have social media, and we can use that to our advantage to make it an educational platform. And one easy way to do that is to incorporate hashtags to include disability. And one of them is called hashtag things disabled people know. And the other is called hashtag cute and disabled. I'm always learning from the things disabled people know, because we all have like our gaps in knowledge. And the second is usually selfies, and like you will learn, we have some attractive people in our community. Second, Netflix is coming out with some great media centered around disabled people and giving us a lot of agency. One of them is called Deaf You. And if you haven't gotten a chance to watch some dramatic reality type of show, I recommend watching it. It surrounds a group of students at a deaf university. And afterward, I also recommend learning about the design of the school, because there's so much that went into it, being intentional about including people who communicate either through touch or through visual means. Crip Camp also chronicles our history as disabled people and a lot of our liberation. And Love on the Spectrum is such a sweet show about a group of people who are on the spectrum and start dating. And I'm like a sucker for romance shows, so this is great. So in addition to that, if you're interested in more design specific things, Universal Design is a free class for those of us who need it on Coursera.com. And you can also contribute to the creators of the class if you're in a position to do so. In addition, there's a couple more. A Japanese company created a line of wheelchairs that are really beautiful and impressive, which you will see in the next slide. And they're called wheelchairs. And I recommend checking them out because they honor our need for beautiful design. And if you're into podcasts or reading books, there is Disability Visibility Project, which is especially great because a lot of disability history is very white, and a lot of the people who have spoken for the community are very in a position where they're not people of color. So Disability Visibility Project addresses that and is way more inclusive. And the author, who I will share in a second, she came out with a collection of writing in a book recently, and I'm getting through that right now. But of course, there's a podcast. And Disability After Dark also addresses the need for more knowledge about disabled people's relationships and sexualities. So it's really great. And the creator, of course, will be in the next slide as well. In addition to the social media hashtags, I recommend following these 3 people. They come out with some really great things. But Alice Wong, she created Disability Visibility Project. Eddie Ndopu is a political spokesperson who is rocking the wheelchair in this picture. And Andrew Garza, is the Canadian behind Disability After Dark in this slide. And so yeah, those are some great pop culture kind of inviting media I recommend. And they come in all forms for all kinds of different ways of learning. For those who are more interested in the discipline of design, here are some great people to follow or connect with. I'm sure that they would love to hear from you if you want to learn more. But some were even lucky enough to be involved in designing the Deaf University I mentioned earlier. And yeah, feel free to take notes. Sarah Henderen, Joss Boys, and Joel Sanders all have remarkable professional histories and look very Norwegian. So yeah. And I'm sure we all have our recommendations too. Feel free to add them to the chat as well, because this is definitely not where it stops. It's just a handful of recommendations. And thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your time and your attention and taking the time to learn about this topic, which affects us all because, you know, we're all living on this globe rotating in space right now. Oh, yes, and you can reach me at Facebook or Instagram. And I would love to hear from you if you want to say. And in the meantime, we have a few more minutes. So if you would like to ask questions, feel free to do so. Me and the co-moderator will address those.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing all that. And thank you to the chat. It was so awesome to hear everyone contributing, answering Natalie's questions, and also sharing some of your own resources. So we do have some questions that we're going to go through. Feel free to stick around for the next rest of this bit. We'll dive into your questions. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function. So I know that there is some questions going in the chat, but if you can use the Q&A that's at the bottom of your Zoom, that would be great. And I'm going to ask this first question. Natalie, it's from an anonymous attendee. I understand that designing with leads to better outcomes, but how can we recruit people, recruit for people with other abilities? Are there any available resources for recruiting disabled people or disabled designers?
Well, let's see. I think a great, it's a thinker right there. I think a great option is most people with disabilities kind of know each other. So if I don't mean to like encourage you to bug disabled people and be like, oh, do you know any designers or people who might fill this position? But get to know some disabled people and see how you can make space for them. I guess is like one option that would be really helpful because it is so difficult for disabled people to find positions that are welcoming to us and our needs, and as well as have people not get so bogged down by the misconceptions of disability and just clouded by ableism. So I just recommend like getting to know people around you. And also there are definitely more formal ways, including how, what is it called? The rehab centers may have options for you to put your positions out there. And I don't know, I know a lot of great people with disabilities who have all kinds of skills and cover the gamut on all kinds of just like industries. And this is making me wonder if I should just set up some kind of like job board for disabled people. But I know that there is a lot of great resources. And if you'd like, you can connect with me privately and I can come up with more options. Yeah.
Awesome, great. I heard a yes, please, and agree for the job board. So, maybe that's your next project, Natalie, if you feel up for taking that on. There's another question that's about being a person with a disability in Austin, if there's been a more frustrating experience or a pleasant experience. I know that during Austin Design Week, there's a tour, that self-guided tour that you can take around hostel design in Austin and how things have been specifically designed not well for everyone. And so if you want to speak a little bit to your experience there.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for pointing out the hostel design concept because it definitely applies to disability and discrimination that goes on. And sorry, what was the beginning of the question?
Yeah, that's okay. It's just about your experience in Austin. So if there's been like a particularly frustrating or pleasant experience where, folks have taken folks with disabilities into mind.
That one's a tough one, but I have gotten to live all over the US in different cities and gotten to travel to different countries in my adult life and compare a little bit from each. But I like Austin pretty good. And one of my favorite places is Chicago though, because there's just such a like art scene, and historically they have had a lot of receptive policy around disabled people and the demands that disabled people have made in that city. In Austin as well, I know that there's a huge advocacy efforts that have been made and met with improvements. And I can't say one is way better than the other, but there's plenty of room for improvement across all of these spaces. And I also recently visited Norway, so like I got to compare a little bit of that, but they had the most amount of disabled people like out and about, and they have so much that they offer disabled people, and Austin comparatively pales a lot. So I have to say, yes, there's a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah, and maybe with this next question too, you can speak to any of the specifics there that you experienced when you were traveling there. Because our next question is, what are some of the more or most creative or innovative service design and product design interventions you've seen or worked towards implementing?
Hmm. What are some of the most creative? Honestly, okay, what I learned about the university that's featured in DefU, it blew my mind because they they really understood what it's like to have the needs of the disabled people at the forefront, and everyone else just benefits from it because it just looks so beautiful and so impressive. Like humans love curvature, like that's one of the things we learn as designers, and it is stunning to see like hallways that are very slowly curved to accommodate people signing to one another as they walk, so it's not abrupt corners, you know. And um, I think that a lot of that would benefit also wheelchair users or deaf-blind people as well, because it's just like you don't have any surprises there, you know? You can just keep moving, and all of us with disabilities have such full lives and such big goals, and I think the spaces around that school kind of show a supportive way to accommodate us.
Great, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
We have another question, and I know that you've shared some of the times where designers were not taking into account disabled folks, and it ultimately would have served everyone. This question is about what are some of the biggest things missed by designers in terms of inclusivity for disabled individuals?
Okay, actually, this is a great question because last year I was at the Austin Design Week and I was blown away that this whole experience exists because, first of all, they easily could have charged so much money for all these brilliant people to come together and rub shoulders, but instead it was free. And I got to hear a lot about the topic of inclusivity, but it was essentially a practice of like theorizing what disabled people might need. And it didn't really get to the heart of the fact that disabled people are people. Like we have needs, we have goals, and we need help just like everyone else does because we're all human. And one of the like goals of this speech is also that disabled people are just as messy and great and like surprising and um, also worth all these kinds of attention to details and things like that when it comes to design work. So I want to point out that basically like seeing disabled people is neither something to be pitied or to be pedestaled, is one of the fundamental ways that you can make us human in your mind. So that's the first step. And so hopefully this talk got you thinking a little bit more about that, because even I experienced a lot of that where I viewed disabled people as some entity far away, but it's not. And like, we're just the same as anyone else in those ways.
Thank you, Natalie. And to folks who are still here, we encourage you to put your questions in Q&A. We still have a couple more minutes for questions. And I also encourage you to scroll through the chat because there's a lot of great conversation and other resources that are being shared by folks here. This question is a bit more technical, Natalie. Vicky is wondering where best to put image descriptions on social media posts to ensure accessibility. Directly in the social post text or using alt text or doing both of those? Does it depend on the platform? She also appreciates the way that you verbally describe the graphics in your slides for those who may not be able to view them.
Yeah, thank you for noticing that. I actually did a little bit of superficial research on this, but basically across all of the different social medias, because they kind of cater to different senses, they're used differently by people who already have low vision or are blind. And within the group of people who are low vision and blind, they already use so many different technologies amongst themselves. And a lot of them, it's not like a one thing that's like retrofitted onto everybody across the board. And like, for example, I know Twitter installed this option to have alt text, but it doesn't apply to GIFs and things. So they might have changed this also, but I know okay, my go-to thing is you don't know what is access to the tool that the person who is the reader or the user, you don't know what they're using. So it's always better to be on the safe side and just include it in the things that are already being most readily available to them. So that doesn't include behind the image or whatever else might be. How am I describing this? Okay, I just include it in the image, just the comments, or no, what's it called?
In like the message itself and like.
Yeah, like the area, like as far to the front as possible, because basically it could also include something really cheeky and something fun that shows a part of who you are, and like everyone even benefits from that. But like it's also a joke that they're in on the person who's using a tool to help them navigate that image description. So that's my hot take on it.
Great, thanks, Natalie. We have another question about what are some examples of for how inclusive design in places of living, school, and work can improve everyone's quality of life. So I know that you showed, talked about that designing for disability can really help everyone. So if you have some more examples of that.
Well, I would love to brainstorm this with you, Courtney, and anyone else who wants to join. But a few that come to mind, like I mentioned, are having curvature in all of the buildings is definitely more inviting for all kinds of different like needs. And then having image description at the forefront of what is already being consumed by the user. And then also, let's see. You know, a friend of mine and I actually were thinking about how can we make the most like amazing party that's also really accessible for like people who have sensitivity to noise and like want to be able to sit down and take breaks or do all these other kind of options. And it really comes down to kind of like what space or like event or gathering online or other forms that it comes down to. But there are so many options. Like you can have so many things, and it comes down to having options essentially. Like you have to have people not get stuck with one thing that you think would fit everyone's needs. And yeah, just making sure that people have a chance to experience it in the best way that they can. But yeah, I'd love to talk with you more about it.
Fantastic. Do we have any more questions, folks? Again, drop them in the Q&A. I know that there's lots of conversation in the chat, but we might have missed it in there if you had a specific question for Natalie. All right. Well, I want to say thank you so much again to Natalie for this amazing presentation. Thank you to all of you for your participation and your questions. I encourage you again to join the ADW Slack if you haven't already. It's a great place to continue this conversation, share what you learned, and keep it going. So thank you all so much. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Natalie. I encourage you to check out what we have going on the rest of the day. Lots of great things happening. There's an event about to start called Is This Event for Everyone? We have Cheryl Miller, who's going to be talking about 50 years of asking the question, where are all the Black designers? And we also have a conversation on embracing your roots. And then finally, are ending with a concert with Mobley. So lots of things to check out. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, everyone.